afternoon. Thank you very much for coming back and welcome back. This panel is going to look at specifically using new media in service of feminist pedagogy, different aspects, it seems, from a couple of us. I'm going to let the presenters introduce themselves as they come up. We're going to start with Lynn Fujiwara, and then myself, and then Alisa Freedman. We'll wrap it up, and then we'll do a short Q&A session afterwards. So I'm watching the time.
Okay.
We've got a bow tie. I'm a time lord.
Am I supposed to feel like I'm talking in a mic? Or
No.
Yeah, because they're recording it.
Oh, so I'm getting recorded now.
Yeah, the mic and the podium is...
Okay. Anyway, I'm fine.
So far,
Okay.
so good.
Anyway, I am Lynn Fujiwara, and I am in ethnic studies and women's and gender studies. I'm going to talk today about I guess I would say, a topic that I teach. And I teach this both in a WGS class or an ethnic studies class. How do I make things appear on there?
Oh, just hit the B button.
Hit the what button?
B.
B? Okay.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'm going to show you the slides that I actually use in my class. And it's from a chapter that I assigned. And I've used this in different courses. I've used it in race, sex, and popular culture. I've used it in queer theories and Asian American studies. Those might be the only two courses I've used it so far. But I'm basically teaching a text by Celine Patino called The Hypersexuality of Race. And it's like Asian American women's sexuality on screen and scene, or something like that. That's the title of her book. And my goal is to teach this material is to really get them to understand the intersections of race, sexuality, gender, beyond, those categories that just keep getting thrown out there, but not necessarily really enmeshed and integrated. So, and I make them read it, it's assigned, and then I pull out key quotes that I want us to focus on. So like this one, it's a really tough argument for them because it's really trying to make this argument about hypersexuality as race positive and taking sexuality out of the sort of oppression victim mode, but rather the agent activist mode. And it's really hard for undergraduates to go there sometimes when they want to say, well, anything that is objectifying or anything that can be read in a particular way is bad, right? They want to be in that good-bad phase or that good-bad dichotomy. So this first quote, I am to keep open the complexity of images as well as the experience of their Asian American women performers, writers, and critics, production and consumption in order to formulate a theory of race-positive sexuality that takes seriously the challenge of engaging issues of power in defining race, sexuality, and representation in terms of Asian American feminist women's practices, politics, and priorities. So we unpack that, and we spend quite a bit of time. I might put them in groups because it's a very dense kind of thing for them to do. So I really try to get them to sort of take the elements apart and to think about what does it mean for something to be race positive? What does it mean for something to be, for sexuality and race to be represented? So we take that apart. And we spend a bit of time talking about this notion of hypersexuality. And Shimizu actually begins her piece with an image of a go-go girl bar in the Philippines, very graphic and very descriptive of what happens at these go-go bars. But then she really wants to take that whole graphic imagery and turn it around and talk about who's consuming, whose pleasure, and whose desire. And it's a stretch. It's really a stretch for them. So we then take this notion of hypersexuality and think about pleasure, pain, and bondage. And, this is already, students are very uncomfortable. They're feeling like, oh my gosh, what are we talking about this with her for? And, but I try to them to loosen up a little. And anyway, so we again, I'll put this out there, break them up, or have them talk in pairs for a few minutes, try to get them to get out there. What does it mean for hypersexuality? What does it mean to own your hypersexuality? What does it mean to enjoy it? What does it mean to consume it? And why and how do we think about the who that's doing the it and the consuming? So, okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I don't have a whole lot of time, but these are just other ways that I sort of try to get at the topic and thinking about taking this notion of power in hypersexuality, that this idea of bondage that Shimizu is working through is that the bondage has also not just been actual images or representations of bondage, but that we've put ourselves in our own bondage by sort of being bounded by that oppressor cage, so that any sort of representation, and also I should add, Shimizu makes her own porn. She does her own, does her own porn movies. She's a professor at UC Santa Barbara in Asian American Studies. So she's really talking then about that the bondage has also become somewhat imposed by ourselves on our own, right? And that we have to work through that bondage through what she calls productive perversity. And so productive perversity becomes really the goal of this unit, to think about, can perversity be productive? Can we think about perversity as counter, or a form of agency or resistance, resisting those images that are sort of immediately typecasted as oppressive, and saying, no, they're not. They're counter-oppressive. All right. Okay, so she's reclaiming bondage. She goes through much more elaborate discussions in the text. But I'm going to move to show you how I use media to get students from this sort of abstract argumentation to actually talking about, does it work? Can this work? And I should also say, in this chapter, she spends a considerable amount of time talking about Margaret Cho and her work as being a really good example of somebody who's taking sexuality. If you've ever sort of watched her shows, you can see that she really likes to be on the outrageous and sort of puts it all out there. Hi, my name's Gwen, I'm here to wash your vagina kind of thing, and talks a lot about leather and sex clubs and all of that, and really sort of pushes her sexuality. She talks a lot about Margaret Cho, and I actually show clips as we're doing this unit, but I'm not going to do that here. So here I'm just really trying to give you a sense of how I walk them through this concept, through the sort of textual, in terms of thinking about the argument she's making. I try to even make a model for them to think about the different elements of hypersexuality in terms of production, consumption, and critique. And then before I set up this clip that I'm going to show you that I use, because I don't want them to watch this clip and say, oh, it's good, it's bad, it's this, it's that. But I want them to sort of think about the image and the media and the mode in terms of what's happening. So I should tell you that I'm going to show you a clip of Tita Tequila that gets read in a lot of different ways. And it's interesting that a lot of people haven't seen it or been aware that she had done it. She's primarily known for her internet. She is Tita Tequila is also known as Tila Nguyen. She is known for her self-made internet porn. And she's also she has music videos also, but I don't know that they've made it off the internet, but she's You can buy her music and her videos. She also then started a reality TV show called A Shot at Love, which was, I think, the first, I could be wrong, but first reality TV show dating, find your partner, bachelor or bachelorette show that centered a bisexual woman and who was competing, men and women were both competing against each other and opposite sex kind of thing. It ran for 2 years. Her reality TV show ran for 2 years. So that is kind of how she became known. And just a little side story about, I'm fascinated with her. And I think she's a really good example of what does it mean to occupy sexuality, or racialize sexuality in such a way, and what work is it doing socially. So I was teaching this in my career theories and Asian American studies, and I had a undergrad who, very out butch Vietnamese woman who, she just like had an attitude the size of a football field, clearly had struggled with her family, great student, really bright. And we were talking, I was telling her about, this article I was working on, and Tita Tequila, and she goes, Tita Tequila? Oh. And I said, what? She goes, well, I think she's a disgrace to my people. And I just thought, wow, that is so interesting. It's so intense. And to be really honest with you, she really has been, I think, erased in Asian American studies or Asian American feminist studies. And I'm really interested in why. What is going on with her production, with her product that people have issues with. So I'll show you the clip and then talk a little bit about how the conversation allows us to really sort of unwrap Shimizu's theory, or whatever it is. Oh, is there supposed to be volume? Oh, I guess that would help.
I'm your substitute teacher. Pop quiz. Can someone tell me, where is Burma? Anyone?
It's a country between India and China, the size of Texas, with a population of 55 million people.
And who is Tan Shui? You.
He's a dictator of Burma. He spreads fear through forced labor, torture, and systematic rape. Last fall, he brutalized Buddhist monks and other peaceful supporters for pro-democracy.
Good. What is 8888? How about you?
This is the day that 3,000 peaceful protesters were killed by the Burmese military, and thousands more were thrown in prison for protesting against their authoritarian rule.
Very good. And the last question, class. This is a big one.
Sorry, Dave, I can't let you do that.
Tita Tequila! the guy in the back who's not having fun. She goes up to him, puts her leg on him, I think, and asks her what the UN Charter is doing in response to all of these human rights violations. And he goes, nothing. She goes, you're right. And she gives him a big kiss, and he has big lips on his cheek. And that's the end, I believe. Yeah. So you know, I think, and I'm not really actually sure. Yeah, it's made by the U.S. Campaign for Burma. Oh, so we don't have a screen. It's okay. So anyway, so we look at that, and then I say, okay, so what is going on here? What is... I do feel like I've had a little bit of a presence surrounding me. In my other class, out of the blue, the phone on the wall starts ringing. It's really bizarre. I've been having some kind of haunting going on. So you know, once they see this, then they start saying, okay, here, how can we then talk about her, in a sense, using her body, using her sexuality, as a form of whatever, edutainment, or whatever we want to call it. But it allows them to see something concrete that they can then try to unpack. Is this productive perversity? And then they get stuck on, is it productive, right? And is this hypersexuality? And what does this hypersexuality mean? What does it imply for the relations of power, for race and sexuality, for racialized sexuality, for race-positive sexuality? So they really start trying to unpack, and they use these images, and they talk about, the first thing they always say is that in the construction of the video, it was clear that she was an object of desire for all the kids in the class. It wasn't about male desire on this woman. Although, at risk of being too crude here, somebody did make a comment about her breasts in my class as we were talking that really upset people. And so we had to kind of go back and rethink, what does it mean for us to be watching and talking about this in the space of the classroom? And to think about the message or the argument in the text. And given that we're a class full of all walks of life of people, what are we saying about us as an audience? And how does that then play into, can we still have race-positive sexuality? Can it still be resistance? Can it still be challenging? Okay. Has this happened before? It's me. There's some... Yeah. And it really does throw them. And we know we don't come out of this discussion with an answer. We don't come out of it, nobody feels happy, actually. They feel really confused because they don't know if they can agree that it's possible. They still feel like there's still possibilities. I'm sorry, the guy was sitting over here when he made the comment, this side of me. You know, it's going to happen. Can those contradictions exist? And still, can we be challenging an hegemonic assumption about sexuality and what we can and can't do in our own production? So that's just a little glimpse of that topic that I teach. I was only supposed to take 11 minutes. But yeah, and then I guess I'll stop there, and maybe we can pick up again after we hear from everybody else.
Okay, before I get started, I just want to take a quick group consensus. Would it be okay if we took maybe a 5-minute break to call tech support, since the rest of the afternoon is so reliant on this stuff to get them to come and fix this? Okay, great.
Maybe I should move to the back.
Not every particular students always want to talk about that, so how do you negotiate that?
Sometimes I will.
Okay.
Especially with stripper friends, because there's
object to the notion of Asian sexuality because of issues of prostitution. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And is that something you've already discussed or not?
Yes, and that's actually how the article starts. It starts with the whole imagery and narrative of Asian prostitution at a go-go bar. So it starts with it straight on, and the gaze, and the act of consumption. So yeah, which I think Shimizu is, the argument that she's making is that reality and that narrative has also bounded us, Asian American women performers, not me, I'm not one, but I aspire. That has become a form of bondage that we are also stuck in, that we are trapped by. And she's really trying to break out of that bondage by reclaiming sexuality and her racialized sexuality as forms of pleasure and agency. But it's hard, right? I mean, it's, I don't think that's necessarily taken and accepted by everybody who reads it. But feminists, yeah. Any other thoughts? While we're waiting for the technology to work.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
Do you know Muriel Johnson? I have a name, I can't remember her work. She's also at UCSB in feminist studies, and she's writing a history of Black women in pornography.
Oh, I've heard about it, but I don't know her.
Because it sounds like what you're doing in the classroom is very similar to her project, which is how do we think Black women's sexual agency in the porn industry, while at the same time accounting for the constraints. And I think it would be really interesting to teach that alongside this too,
Yeah.
because the project is really similar.
Yeah.
She's really wonderful and conscious about the constraints, but also just insistent that that there should be this space where Black women get to have a kind of sex-positive relationship to representation.
Yeah.
So,
And especially now that space has largely become the internet.
yeah.
And what does that do to that space?
Right.
When the screen comes on, I have to try to notice, were all of the students in the classroom white?
Yeah, there's some Asian women in there.
There's African American
Men.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if it makes any of the students uncomfortable because you're a teacher and you're teaching a video about objectification of the teacher. Because students don't think about the gaze on the teacher.
You know what?
They don't.
They don't.
They engage in it. One of the things that I often make my students do is they come up to the front of the room and look out, see what it looks like. But students, like the teacher is the one constant that's always in the front of the room, and they're always, students are always gazing at the teacher.
Yeah.
And when you put a video on that deals with that kind of eroticized gaze, I wonder if they squirm or if they react.
They look nervous. They look nervous. They don't know if they should laugh. They don't know if they should like it. They don't know what they should be looking at. They get very, very nervous. And, I haven't thought about it, though, in terms of the teacher. They definitely know exactly what we're wearing every single day. I had somebody give me a gift, a colorful scarf, because she felt like I needed to brighten up my black and brown. Tell me that. So if you ever see me walking around with a colorful scarf, it came from the student, because it's the only one I own. They definitely look nervous. They're also very cynical. I think students, they don't really want to have fun, or I don't know. They feel like they're not supposed to be having fun in the class or something. So they want to discount everything. They want to argue everything as, trash or,
I just say it would be interesting to see if they would react differently if the woman were a police officer or an attorney instead of a teacher.
Yeah, but then I guess who would she be talking to? And I think the scene is set up to be about educating.
Exactly, so it sort of puts them in a different kind of meta level.
I don't know, but they definitely squirm. Which I like about the women's and gender studies or ethnic studies classroom is
Burning class.
yeah.
Well, if there are no more questions, I guess we'll just push on because it seems like we're on our own in this desert island. There's no outside.
I could give my boss a call.
What's that?
I could give my boss a call. His cell phone is on.
Do you want to try it's just not picking up on the...
Well, I don't know what its deal is. Maybe after it restarted totally, it'll be fine now.
I'm wondering if you keep it on input 1, if it's a problem with switching between the extended screen.
Well, input, because I'm a wanderer. Okay. What I'd like to talk about, and not really talk about in a linear way, but just kind of throw ideas out, is thinking about open sourcing the syllabus and the classroom and what that can mean in terms of the gender politics of labor, in terms of who's getting paid and who's not for the labor of putting content online, and also think of it from the perspective of the student and access. I'm a PhD student here at the University of Oregon, and I'm in the School of Journalism and Communication, but I also teach at the community college up the hill in anthropology. And there's a big difference between the students I have here at the University of Oregon and the students I have there. And one of the things that I've really tried to do is minimize the cost of taking a course at Lane by really drawing on different routes of freeing up content. So one of the first things I think I need to do is explain what is open source. And I plagiarized this from Wikipedia. But open source describes the practices in production and development that promote access to the end product source materials. It's also a philosophy and pragmatic methodology. So in thinking about open source, on one hand you have open source software. It's about code. It's about making programs. It's about making programs available for other people to mingle with, to take apart, to put back together, in whatever ways suit their fashion. And it's about doing it in a community fashion. Open source also has another layer in the classroom, and that's access to materials in terms of language. So if we think about this as two boundaries, we have the one boundary, which is access to the program, like the thing that you need to put the stuff together, like code or Adobe Flash. But you have a whole other second barrier there that's meant to protect the walls, and that's the language that goes with it. And so when I'm thinking about open source in my classrooms, I'm thinking not just, oh, I want it to be on a blog that somebody's not profiting from, but I'm also thinking that I want it to be accessible and open in terms of language. And so I'm not thinking of open source just simply in terms of academic content distributed across the web, but also in terms of language. And what I do to kind of meet that expectation is I really draw on blogs, academics' blogs. I also use a lot of academics who are conscientious of this when they're writing their articles, and they're putting their articles online on their personal web pages. So I'm not losing the classics, as they might say. There's still some of that in there, but it's being drawn from different places. The question is, why use open source? It's not hard to sell it to you folks in this room, right? I mean, we all kind of have that idea of the political endeavor in using open source. But it's really about responsibility and moral obligation as knowledge producers. It's also about our own personal politics, what we're striving to do in the classroom. For me, when I teach at Lane, teaching anthropology for me is kind of a political endeavor as much as it is here's the introduction to the field. I want students to come out being able to look at the world in a different way that doesn't necessarily reproduce these random structures of domination. And so the way I do that is even going all the way down to the course software. It's interesting, though, and the reason I have the motorcycle and the scooter is what's happening with open source in kind of the academy. On one hand, you have open source being critiqued by industry professionals and making the comparison. You know, we have all the power, we have all the bells and whistles, we've got a security alarm, et cetera, et cetera. But when your road has a speed limit of 20 miles per hour, you don't need the sports bike. The scooter does just fine. And so, okay, that makes a logical critique, and that's kind of where some of the open source movement came from on Silicon Valley. And what happened is that as people start to adopt it, scholars in this weird trend in critical code studies start critiquing open source as being this symbol of surplus. And the only reason you have too much time on your hands if you can code and you can do all this programming work. So it's kind of this two-way critique, and it's nice to kind of get that out in the air because there's a lot of different ideas going along with that critique, especially the idea that, or the fact that it's interesting that just as soon as political movements, especially those that aren't white dudes, get a hold of the means of production, it becomes a thing we have to problematize. So I'm going with the scooter. That's my politics. And the reason I kind of like I wanted to put this in the symposium is because it's journals like Ada that really make my class work. It's open source collectives of scholars getting together, writing things in ways that are academically reliable, but open to a variety of peoples. And so one of the things I wanted to throw out, and this is something I stole from all of you the last day or so and kind of taking from your ideas, is open sourcing classes really kind of vibrates and resonates really well with feminist ideals of the classroom. One of the ways is if you look at the textbook industry, it's all about competition. And how can there's always this interesting discussion at anthropology meetings with in the community college teacher section, and the textbook authors are arguing with one another. They would normally be nice and friendly people, but they're cutthroat. Why? Because they want their textbook to be the textbook that's adopted. And so open sourcing this whole thing and making it not about the profit of getting the really minuscule book royalties you'll get back kind of takes the lid off that competition. It reinforces cooperation. In the same way that Ada kind of emphasizes that cooperation of, I don't want my journal, it's not, I want my journal piece in here and I have to cut off this person to get it in there. It's, this person can really help me and expand my ideas. It's also about progress. Copyright extensions and DRM and anti-privacy lawsuits, they increasingly support the producer more than the creator. It's not about production or creation, but the producer is like, oh, I added this fancy cover, and your book looks so much better, and it's going to sell better because I got the contracted cover on it. And it often is used to sidestep kind of the democratic access to creators' fruits of labor. And then the final thing, again, that I'll bring up is access. And many of my students at the community college are single parents, fathers and mothers, and they don't have a ton of money to lay out for a $300 textbook. And it's useless most of the time because it's just somebody's lectures written down in a book form. So I wanted to situate this a little more concretely in the class that I teach. And I teach an Introduction to Anthropology class, and I teach an Anthropology of Mass Communications class. And in anthropology, at the introductory level, we have this problem with stasis. Anthropology over the last 20 years has drastically changed. It's become a very political field. We have a ton of activists who are doing great work with communities, but what we're still teaching is a static 1940s paradigm of apolitical anthropology. And I mean, we will spend 4 weeks talking about pre-1920s. And it's a weird imbalance. And it's kind of a strange imbalance because we have anthropologists working on radio occupation and feminist movements in Oaxaca. We have anthropologists working on the exploitative politics of microfinance and people working on zombie walks in Canada, but we're still teaching kids the classic apolitical kinship structures and colonial management of Africa and Asia. So it's kind of sad. But it's weird too, because the other day I had a textbook salesman from McGraw-Hill come to my class or come to my office at Lane, and he's like, "We've got these great textbooks we call the M series, and they look like magazines, and it's updated, and we're fantastic. They're exciting. They have online content. Your kids will go crazy over them. Research shows that they will absorb more information." And you open it and flip through it, and I was kind of like, oh, maybe this will be interesting. First off, it's $115. They're about 100 pages because they have lots of online content that you'll use and love. But it's still the same crap. It's still heavy on the 1920s, and it's like, okay, well, you updated the medium. How about some message update? And then on top of that, we have all of the people teaching Introduction to Anthropology, at least at the community college section meetings at the American Anthropological Association, are under the age of 30. So it's all the younger people teaching the crappy course that nobody else wants to teach. So why is it still outdated? Derp. Right? It's the textbook. And so getting into an open source kind of courseware is political in the sense that we're moving away from the exploitative politics of the academic industry, but also in the sense that we're reintroducing a political anthropology into the field. And so instead of teaching Levi-Strauss's kinship system over and over again, maybe I'll switch to using a blog that talks about how Levi-Strauss's mythological model is great for understanding, I don't know, the Kardashians. In the same way that, I want my students to read Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack of Privilege, I'll have them also watch this great film because both of those essays, the essay's available free online, and hey, here's this awesome YouTube video where somebody actually uses the thing in a contemporary context. So they get used to using stuff. And so now the practical side of my presentation is, how do you do it? And the thing that I'm going to use starting next week, or not next week, but next term, is Google Reader. I'm going to really try and use Google Reader to think about how to distribute this stuff. Obviously, Google is not really open source. Agreed. But it's better than what I've got. So, and it's free, right? And students have access and they know how to use it. So I just want to show you real quick what that looks like. If I can get it up. There we go. So, the wrong way. There we go. So we have Google Reader. And Google Reader is fantastic because what you can do is share things from one single account to multiple users in a special way. And so what I have here is a sample course, University of Oregon, whatever it is. And if your students, they'll just have to create a Google account and get on. And then you have this first, this is how you can distribute articles, right? Shared by University of Oregon. Next week we're talking about feminist cultural production. How do we make great entertainment for both young and old women? And how might it affect society? Is My Little Pony's Friendship is Magic a feminist show? And here's a blog post from Geek Feminism blog that talks about that. Now, am I going to talk purely and lecture about this article? Probably not. But what I do lecture about is this might prep them for it. And it might give them a context, a hook to hang their ideas on. And likewise, you can flip through, and there's different ways you can talk about gender binary. And there's some awesome gay men pinups and some women pinups. But you can also share links. So here's Urban Outfitters is obsessed with Navajos. And maybe I want them to read that, but there's also this awesome op-ed that showed up that a friend of mine posted somewhere on an open letter to my local hipsters about hipsters borrowing Native American aesthetics and how that fits in with the wider historical discourse of white people taking Native crafts and enjoying them while erasing the natives who made them. But the other question is always, how exactly do I find the material? Well, Google Reader helps with that too. Because look, you have all these great blog posts, and you aggregate things from different
press. I was cutting
blogs.
up the New York Times the other day, and as many...
I don't know where that's coming from. So here, I have all my subscriptions.
So did you create these pages? Did you make these? Did you purposely make it, put those there?
Yes. So what you can do is add a subscription. You find your favorite blog, like Geek Feminism blog or Wonket, or I can't remember the company that hosts all of the trashy people of Walmart, girls in yoga pants, et cetera, and it'll aggregate them into here so that you can read them each day and you can just flip through very quickly. And it's really nice to have all that information there because I can just send it whenever. Let's see if I can get this to load. Show. Oh, there we go. So here's all the blogs that I'm following. And it tells me what counts and where things are. And so if I know next week I'm teaching on cultural environments, I might find the blog that's called Environment and Culture, who's the curator at the Washington Museum, and pull one of his great things on race and the environment down and send it to students. So it's just a way to open up the course a little bit.
Are you picking postings or the whole blog?
No, I'm picking postings because I have this feeling that, and no, I know this. If I send a student to a whole blog, they're either A, not going to go there, or B, they're going to get lost. And they're going to read everything except for what I wanted them to read, which is fine. That's part of the letting go that you have to deal with. But I'd rather them read the thing I need them to read, too. So just kind of taking it back to the textbook real quick, it brings us into reconceptualizing what a textbook would be. And I really like, and Karen and I usually click on things like this because she'll say something like, how are we going to preserve the text? How are we going to do, what are we going to do when everything's outside of the book? If we make this great, online open source crowdsourced textbook that is outside of publishers' rings that professors can use and links to current stuff, what happens when the current stuff disappears? And it's a really good question. But it's also a question that has a long gendered history in the relationship between, say, text and word. And so it's another history of why are we so attached to text that's permanent, and what are kind of the gender politics that underlie that as well. We're reusing content from elsewhere. It's got lots of pros and cons, and I'm out of time, so I'll leave the rest for questions. All right, Alisa, your turn. And I don't think the screen will shut off.
Anything closely. I have to go way macro on most things. And the way I'll go macro today is, in addition to talking about topics, I'm going to talk about assignments. And so what I figured to pick out some themes today for the next 10 minutes and 75 PowerPoints, I'm going to, this is my favorite image lately of the Powerpuff Girl fighting some kind of Godzilla monster. I'm known for showing PowerPoints and for talking fast, so slow me down or I will get like Nyan Cat. I will first present some general themes pertaining to my course topics are so dependent online because I really do teach how images circulate globally, especially global images of Japanese popular culture. Then I'll show some topics in which I approach themes of gender and digital media. And then I'll outline some pedagogical approaches, not only using media as a content, but using media as a means of evaluation, and some of the challenges I face. And I'll go over some sample assignments. This short presentation, these are my kids, are based on my experiences teaching popular culture at UO, and a lecture discussion course which I'm now teaching at Waseda University in Tokyo. And these are courses all around the theme of the global circulation of Japanese popular culture. A little bit about me to see how I'm trying to use these classes in my own thinking. A lot of my work explores the intersection of digital technology, gender, and notions of literature, books, and popular culture in the US and Japan. And I just have to bring this up because this is something that I'm obsessed with lately, is Hello Kitty is always looking at you. Unlike, like the Sesame Street characters will be looking over here, Japanese cute characters are always looking at you because they are your friend. But another part of my work deals with the global circulation of children's culture, new media terms for gender roles, especially as television is breaking down. And I'm really interested in how the notion of literature is changing when more stories are told, circulated, and created online. So just to give you some ideas, this comes right from a series of 4 syllabi that I've designed for my classes about how to teach popular culture online through in various levels of classes. And these classes that I'm cribbing from are seminars ranging from 25 students to my ginormous class right now of 110. But popular culture, which is never neutral, always teaches much about the values of the society that produces and consumes it. Popular culture constructs images of Japan at home and abroad. These are truisms that we all know, but I have to back up and sometimes explain this to the students who are so used to consuming things that they don't think about it anymore. But Japanese fashions, games, manga, anime, toys, music, and more have spread worldwide. And Japan, the Japanese government has mobilized ways to build a national superpower economic clout through the circulation of
popular culture. And not only that, there's fans, or another level of people using these images of Japanese popular culture to make statements, form communities, and to overturn stereotypes. Hello Kitty is arguably the most recognizable icon in the world, and she was made ambassador to Asia in 2008. An ambassador is usually a person. We also look at how Japanese popular culture has filtered into global vocabularies, like Zilla. I don't think Zilla is used for men, but Zilla coming from Godzilla, which most people under the age of 20 don't realize. And we also look at how Japanese popular culture often equates to global youth culture. Like my students get very nostalgic about their Pokemon cards from 1995, and they like to tell stories about how they wanted a Pikachu and how they didn't know Pokemon was from Japan, and then they realized they just thought Pokemon is Pokemon. But we sort of unpack ideas of what is, where the boundaries and flows of nation are, especially when you're a child and you're not thinking about these things. Some of the questions I ask in my classes are, what makes Japanese popular culture so globally fascinating? How are cute characters transforming global politics and the ways people construct their own identities? Are there any negative effects of regarding Japan as a hipster culture of cool? Another big question that pertains to a lot of the things I'm interested in right now, is it more important to study Japanese popular culture today in a way when images are so more immediately accessible and transcend national boundaries in ways different from any other time? Having said different from any other time, it's important for me to back up and contextualize in my classes that the circulations of images is not new when it comes to Japan. That Godzilla was one of the first foreign films to be shown in the United States in the 1950s. It was the first Japanese movie to go global, even though the dubbed American version erases the anti-war, anti-nuclear message of the original 1954 film. Astro Boy, Tetsuwan Atom, was the most popular television show in the United States in 1963 for a few weeks. And a lot of these images I'm showing you right now are not just from Japan, but are incorporating Japanese culture, like putting Japanese culture into the Powerpuff Girls. So what happens when images can be more quickly removed from their original home and placed in new contexts? What is lost, what is gained, and how do we look at them and look at ourselves differently? Again, I come back to this theory in my class, and I use the youth knowledge that my students generate about their generation. I theorize that the generation who came of age in the 90s has consumed global culture differently, partly because they've grown up with internet access their whole lives, if they're middle class or upper middle class. And the American generation who came of age in my day, where I still remember seeing pictures of Toyotas being burned on television news in the 80s. But saying that if you're upper middle class or middle class in many places in the world, you have, if you're 20 years old, not known a life without a computer. To give some reference, Steve Jobs unveiled the Mac to the world in 1984. Notice the POA, I have to point that out. YouTube started in 2005. Nico Nico Doga, the Japanese YouTube, was 2006. Facebook and Mixi is the Japanese Facebook, 2004. Another thing I have to remind that some pop culture trends are local. Like in Japan, there's been this huge boom, a Japanese word for pop culture trend, for roll cake. But the culture that gets exported to the world is kyaru pyamu pyamu. So what's popular abroad, popular in Japan, isn't necessarily the Japanese popular culture that's popular abroad. It's interesting to think about what Japanese popular culture just gets absorbed into our television images, our newspaper images of, for example, Pikachu debuted in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in 2010. Hello Kitty's been there for a bunch of years now. But again, many children don't think about Pikachu as Japanese, just think about Pikachu as being children's culture. So the Japanese government is trying to leverage some of popular culture as a means to build up the national image, national economy. At the same time, the government is passing more and more regulations against the content of manga anime that can be exported and consumed globally especially. It's illegal now to bring in, this is not the Japanese government, but in Australia you can't bring in boys' love comics or yaoi. Another piece of the puzzle, and I'll go really fast because I have 5 minutes left. We talk about, when you can't talk about Japanese culture without talking about cute. And we had this great discussion in my ginormous class last week about cute versus sexy, which is a topic that often comes up. The Japanese kind of cute that this kind of pop culture power is based on is a form of soft power, to borrow a term that's been circulating since 2001. But this kind of cute is not just a cute that, it's a kind of kawaii is the Japanese word for this kind of cute. It's a kind of cute of something that's so vulnerable that you want to take it home and hug it and take care of it. It's not like a big bird kind of cute where, you know, it's sort of like a childlike kind of cute that you want to pat it on the head. It's sort of a cute that's premised on an idea of putting something in a vulnerable situation, like Pooh getting his head stuck in a honey jar, or Maru the cat climbing into all sorts of boxes and bags. That this sort of sadism of a cute thing because it's vulnerable and stuck somewhere and needs your help. So that's sort of the basis behind a lot of Japanese kind of cute. It's this kind of cute you want to take care of. And a student had defined it best that hard power is when you need to use force to get people to do what you want, but soft power is you're so cute they want to do it for you. So this is an idea that's sort of penetrating a lot of Japanese global politics lately. Again, I'm not trying to stereotype Japan, but Japan knows that the image, it's not Toyotas that are circulating as Japan's national image, but Hello Kitty. So cute characters often convey stern messages. This is one of my kids that's with me in Tokyo now, posing with people, the gender-neutral mascot of the Tokyo Police. So my students are often asking, why is there a character that represents everything in Japan, from police to the fire department to different localities? And we have to unpack these images. And the way I ask the students to do this is to bring in images or to constantly notice the public campaigns that are around us. We also talk about cute overload. Or is there something about this historical moment of cute that we're living in that's different from any other? It's often interesting when I have older students in the class, we unpack older stereotypes of Japan, which are also premised on a certain kind of cute, if you will. So in my classes, we use digital media and gender. We look at what happens in this age when everything is so accessible and unmoored from context. And my current classes raised a lot of interesting issues about news and the creation of animated news, or how popular culture is affecting what we consider to be newsworthy. Some of the topics I explore in the class relevant to some of the themes we've discussed are Japanese characters invade the world, how Godzilla's turned from foe to friend. Godzilla's female, she lays eggs. Hello Kitty is ambassador to Japan. How to teach children about disaster. This is Nuclear Boy Gets a Stomach Ache, a video that went viral after the triple disaster. Nuclear Boy, Fukushima is just farting. If Fukushima, the nuclear plant, poops, then there's going to be big problems. We talk about children in popular culture. And it's interesting, again, to look at this popular culture from the 1960s in light of nuclear disaster. We talk about gendered characters, and my students all want to study Japanese popular culture because they love Miyazaki Hayao films. This is Kiki's Delivery Service. Schoolboys and schoolgirls has created national images, gendered images. And we talk about these images, how they circulate in a time of precarity, precarious in times of the historical moment in which schoolboys and schoolgirls represent ideas of the future. Also precarity of the time period of adolescence. Street girl fashion, something near and dear to my own heart, emoticons. We talk about the academic field of otaku, or nerd studies, how it's a current academic field that objectifies women. Instead of studying female nerds, it's more about male nerds consuming images of two-dimensional women with big boobs. We look at how digital culture is forming new communities and the power of fans. For example, Death Note, the manga, anime, live-action film, or Train Man, which is based on an internet novel that was collectively written online. And since we talk about Death Note, sometimes I dare to talk about slash or yaoi. We'll see what the class composition is and how willing to do that. We also talk about Japan's role in global memes. I have to teach Nyanka because I can't stand it. We talk about the other cultures coming into Japan. I'm wrapping things up. And then Korea. I happened to be in Tokyo when there was a demonstration against Korean television. I'm actually going to take 2 more minutes because I want to cover assignments really fast. The game invasion, fan industries. How I teach all this is I try to make use of the context, not only online, but the physical context in which I am teaching. When I'm here at UO, I like to use the art museum, and the helpful staff pulls old examples of pop culture. This is Sugoroku, an old Japanese board game from the 18th century. When I'm at Waseda, I take them on class trips. The students have requested a trip to a cat cafe. We are going next week. We will pet the cats.
People are taking their cat to the cafe, or you go
No.
there to see a cat?
You go there and you see cats. This is a cafe you go to. You buy food for people and food for cats. And it's a very relaxing environment. You have a cup of tea. You give a little bit of snack to the cats and you pet them. It's a big fad. There's no dog cafes. I don't think dogs would put up with this. Another way is I use my colleagues and my students' knowledge. I have guest lectures from my colleagues. I also have my former students come back and lecture to my classes and share projects that they've created with me. So in some ways I do this while using media, and I could bring back these slides or make you copies because they're sort of wordy, but I map out to the students clearly what my goals are. And I make sure that they have copies of these general goals that I want them to learn to be more collaborative, or lay it out to them what I expect. And my goal is to always be useful and to have students build on what they know. And students now think they know everything, so it's a good place to start. And I don't want them to produce something that they're going to delete. They have to produce something that's going to endure. So some assignments, and I'm open to suggestions. I've been using Ning, even though I get very angry that they charge now for space. But I really need a social networking site that's private to my classes, because students share videos, they share photographs, and I don't want to have a Facebook page, and I can't stand Google groups. They drive me insane. So I like Ning also because I could do things that I use Blackboard for. I could post documents. I could have reader response entries. But again, they charge, and I'm morally opposed to that. So if you have any suggestions. I also use Google Docs. We generate class documents together, such as bibliographies, depending on the size of the class. Midterms, I branch out of the word paper, and I give them 2 options. One more analytical, one more creative. And oftentimes they produce videos or films based on class themes. This is one student created an advertising campaign for Cool Japan based on Godzilla and based on the internet meme of Gadan, or Get Down, the dance craze. I also do short participation exercises that ask students, for example, come in with an image of a cute character. Or where in your day have you encountered a Japanese pop culture thing? Or what Japanese popular culture do you see in Oregon that you don't think exists anywhere else? So it's just short things that ask them to look around outside or online. And lastly, I give final projects that are specialized to the students. This terrifies the students. And I'm trying to do this in a 110-student class, and I can try to go into that. But I try, the way that I think is to use examples. So I always give them examples instead of guidance, and we try to generate ideas together. In the past, students have created comic books. They've done guidebooks. This is a guidebook to Pokemon. And they are required to post their work online. It's not an option. They have to, because they have to be responsible to the world. The last slides are, I'm now doing this with a large enrollment class that's produced certain kinds of challenges. And this course now in week 3 is still a work in progress. The challenges that I'm facing now is I'm teaching popular culture globalization to a class of 110 students from 18 different countries, who all have different expectations of 1, what a university is, 2, what a professor is, 3, what an assignment is, 4, what pop culture is. So it's not only trying to balance, do I lecture, do I ask them to engage, do I ask them to discuss? I'm just trying to think. This is an image that one student brought in of a Hello Kitty shop in Vietnam, to think about how they have experienced globalization in their own lives is one of my goals. So there, I took 13 minutes, and I'm done. Lunchboxes and created a website. And the website's fantastic. I could show you it. Not only did she take pictures of the final products, but she also has a video of her creating a character. This is a fad for creating Japanese lunchboxes based on popular culture. Lunchboxes are something that are required in Japanese elementary schools and junior high schools. You bring in a lunchbox, and it's often you have to have a nice lunchbox with carrots in the shape of rabbits or things like that to show that you're loved by your parents.
Oh my God.
What? Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, I inherited an apartment from a former resident director that has kids. So I could pack my lunch with little Hello Kitty heads. I could stamp them on my rice wicks. So I'll be happy to answer questions about, I just figured I'd show you some ideas based on a different context.
Great. Presenters want to set up the stereo microphones. We can do Q&A. All right, cues.
You talked about making I can't remember what it was, Bing or something like
Ming.
that. Ming. I don't really know what that is.
Ming is a social networking site where you could set up private social networks. And Ming has certain functions that, I mean, that has a bazillion functions, but the ones that I use, for example, I like to use reader responses, like sort of Blackboard posts, where the students will post something before class. And it has a blog function, and I'll post a series of questions, and students can respond to it and see everybody else's responses. And another thing I use on Ming is the students can freely, even though they don't get credit for it, post videos and photographs related to our class themes. And in a class I taught in the spring, I think we ended up with like 140 videos and 200 and some photographs by the end of class. So it really does, it becomes like a little mini Facebook plus Blackboard, in a sense, because I could use the functions of sort of responses. I could use the functions of people sharing things on their Facebook wall. The students could be friends with each other. And sometimes students will post like happy birthday messages. So it really does take the class outside the class. And this is based on my theory that all of my students use some kind of social network, be it Facebook, be it Google+, be it Twitter. So they're used to that kind of environment.
I have a suggestion for you from
Thank you.
private minigroup.com is a completely private social network, and you can set it up for classroom.
Minigroup.com. Do they charge?
No, it's still free. I don't know if it'll someday be charged, but it's free.
Yeah, Ning started free.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. You can post video content, images, text.
Yeah. That's good to know. Thank you.
Bryce, I wanted you to talk more because we had had a conversation about the possibility of your actually putting together a textbook in Google Reader for an introductory anthropology course, and I think that that's so rich and fascinating, and anything I can do to kind of stick it to textbook publishers in the United States in particular, I feel good about.
Right.
So I was wondering, and I think it also offers us these amazing opportunities for collaboration. I teach this big lecture course called Gender Diversity in Media, which a version of which is taught, at many, many institutions around the United States, and we're stuck with really clunky, not very good, expensive readers for the course. And I do what you do, which is to say I use a lot of stuff from blogs. I only use open source material because I don't want my students to have to pay $50 for the textbook. So I was wondering if you could talk about how far are you into that process?
So the process was born out of a conversation with 4 of my friends. All of us have fled from the field. We've all left anthropology. And so part of it is an FU to the field that's outdated, and part of it is an FU to the book publishers. We're in the stage where we're trying to figure out what the problems are going to be. And if we can, we're kind of at that stage where it's like, well, on the one hand, we have the problem of the classics. How do we get students to read the classics if we're only going to use things that are open source or online? Well, things like Levi-Strauss are public domain and are spread all over the web by great folks like Alex Golob and Tom Bolstorff. They've got things that they've pulled out and they've made open source because they're part of a larger project and they've gotten the copyright clearance. but right now, two of the biggest things that we're trying to figure out is how do we make it so that it's not just those of us putting it together that use it? We'd like it to be one of those things where we could show it to professors and be like, hey, this is something we have, and would really like it to get adopted just, as one of those things. The second problem is keeping it up to date, because links disappear, but also the intensive amount of labor it'll take to keep constant with the field, and to try and think about how current do we want it to be, and do we want it to change with every large catastrophe. The big one being last year, where the American Anthropological Association took the word science out of its mission statement. And so how do we create a section? How do we integrate it into another section? Do we even talk about it? Those kind of issues. And so that's where we're at. And then the third one is, like you said with Ada, performing legitimacy. So getting it to be a recognized, oh, this isn't just a bunch of grad students with some blogs.
Well, I'm thinking a lot about this lately because I sit on a lot of graduate student exams, and I'm constantly reminded of how, like when it comes to categories like communication history, as to how resolutely the field has resisted remembering women and people of color who worked in those fields. So just a possibility that you might be able to put together a reader in communication history that would acknowledge the contributions of people who really haven't been read in the field for 30 or 40 or in some cases 50 years would be amazing, right? And to make that available so that students would have that as a resource, I mean, that's just me.
Right. And one of the other problems is thinking of theoretical consistency, because in anthropology, and I don't know about other fields per se, but in anthropology, the West Coast is very materialist and the East Coast is very culturalist. And so if you read textbooks, they all do have a theoretical agenda. And so trying to figure out how we would make a consistent theoretical agenda based on things that we're scrapping together.
What if you just made it explicit?
Well, that's what we want to do. Yeah.
Part of the kind of hidden politics of the book to say, look, this is a feminist.
Right, and that's part of the conversation, which has all been occurring on Google Plus, which has been really great to use that.
When you talk about making materials available to students, other people answer this too, because I've been thinking about it. Do you make PDFs of large sections of books and then just put them up there?
No, I don't, because part of it is also getting away from those books and saying that book format for the scholarship is not legitimate. But I have been making PDFs in the sense that I do have students who are in economic places where the internet is a real struggle for them. And so I do PDF all of my sites, and I have them on a thumb drive so that if a student comes to me and they say, hey, I work 2 jobs, I don't have access to the internet except for at the library, then I have something that I can give them. And then if they say, well, I don't really have a home PC either, well, I have free printing. So I'll just use my resources. That way they at least have something. And the question that comes from that, though, is if I have this storehouse of PDFs, should I draw on those for my courses as well and put them online if the link disappears? And it's like, well, maybe not. Is that my material to make live on forever, or am I just being part of the system when I do that?
One thing I have noticed with students in PDFs, and I'm still wedded to books because I'm a literature person, and that's the form in which literature circulates most often. But students are creating their own guerrilla textbooks, and on websites like forshared.com, and they're taking parts that are often assigned in class, they're taking whole textbooks and uploading them onto these share websites. So they're doing what publishing companies fear and what we would like to subvert on their own.
And I think, at least my students, when I have students, I tell them the reason why I use open source. I have a spot on my syllabus that says that I'm using open source because I think that the entire process of publishing textbooks and selling them to students and them being purely textbooks and no use beyond that is a very exploitative system, and that the authors aren't making any money, it's the publisher that's making money, and so it kind of gets these students into understanding, hey, there's a reason why I'm reading websites, and they're just as legitimate, and it doesn't matter that they're not published by McGraw-Hill.
Do any of you use YouTube U? I was a little intrigued by that, but there's no table contents.
I use it. The YouTube, so like professors can put their lectures and stuff on.
Yeah, and multimedia
and
stuff.
multimedia presentations.
Student probably do that with our lectures, but I would hate to see an image of myself on YouTube driving crazy.
I just wondered if anybody here was using it.
Hope not.
I mean, I teach a lot of theory courses, which are not always the most scintillating thing to teach. And there's some really actually great interviews of people on YouTube that the students love to see because it gives them a sense of who these people were or are. And so, even old television stuff like from the 50s and 60s from CBC with McLuhan debating Norman Mailer, they're quite short and they're amazing because of the aesthetic.
Yeah.
As much as for what they're also, how they're sort of conversing. So
it's an excellent. But what I do often when I'm using one of these many social networking sites, or even now in the archaic Waseda version of Blackboard, I have a file of related clips and images. And that's when it's great, like if we're reading a book by, like we just read Godzilla on My Mind by Bill Tsutsui. I uploaded a lecture by Bill Tsutsui somewhere in this expert on Godzilla, and the students could see who the guys who wrote the book.
The other thing that has been interesting teaching even that kind of course is that sometimes having students sort of say to them, these people we are reading, like whatever, are people who actually have jobs in universities. Especially if you phone them up. It's amazing. They've had John Durham Peters and they've had all kinds of people. Interviewed by some first year under, there's Kim students harassed me. It's great. Things like with Foucault, where they pretended that he's alive and they've asked their questions and they imitate his voice and give their own responses. And so, there's all kinds of crazy things even in the most dull courses you can kind of do.
That's
or
fun.
Performing the theorists is also very fun.
One of the midterm assignments I often give is suppose you're doing a round table with like two of these theorists or authors that we've read.
Yeah.
Have them, you're the moderator. You create 5 questions and their answers in their tone of voice and have them react to each other.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to see how the students write out these answers.
Yeah, I know. But I guess my larger question related to the bigger ADA project is, well, thank you. This is really wonderful to hear all about pedagogy because it makes me also ask the question of who's our audience back to some of the other questions. And often as academic scholars who are at a certain particular level in their career, we are writing for each other. And I'm wondering, do we encourage actively shorter pieces that we are thinking are, should, and will be used for teaching purposes? Or are we having a mix? Again, being aware of what was said this morning about what I was thinking of feature creep. How do we balance sort of saying, okay, we're doing one thing, but we might also want to offer resources? Do we have people who are responsible for different sections of what, ADA or ADA, you say tomato, I say tomato? ADA. Is, how do we, these are all wonderful ideas, and I can just, see the potential of everything that needs to be done. But I wonder how we kind of do it so that it, can keep going, be sustainable, get done. And then what does this raise in terms of issues of audience for the journal?
So my concern is that also how searchable is ADA going to be? Like if it's not known, like for example, I've been a thorn in everyone's side in many ways, but one of the ways I've been pushing is the international presence. Like I don't think scholars, there's so many big programs in Japan building up right now that have English language education in different ways, and a lot of are built on sort of a Japanese version of what they see as the liberal arts model in the U.S. That how will people, unless we go around and advertise it, actually be able to search and see that this content is there for teaching? Because ADA, I don't think will be the first word that comes to people's minds when they're searching.
But the subtitle, Gender, New Media and Technology, is very helpful in that way.
And very searchable.
The nice thing is that me and Stacey have a lot of search engine optimization experience, so I think that will also help when we're creating it. And then we'll do things like, we'll register for an ISSN. We'll try to get it in indexes. So there'll be different kind of traditional ways to get it out that way.
And I don't know about other people's Google and how it's been optimized, but I know when I logged into Google and I searched gender, new media, and technology, or yesterday I searched open access feminist journals. Ours is in the top 8. Fembot pops right up.
That's awesome.
Fembot's right there.
One thing that, again, we have heard is we're native English speakers, right? So these are words that come to our minds.
Yeah.
We may want to even think more simplistically than words like, that people maybe in Cambodia might think. Not that they're stupid, but when they're thinking about what sources are available, they might not be thinking the same terms we are.
Well, it's kind of funny because when we were originally talking about it, I think what we had in our dream world, we decided we would offer every article in 15 languages or something, right? This is the ideal.
It's just an Esperanto.
But there are certainly different things that we can do with meta terms with other keywords to make it more available, and very well taken the point that the internationalization is part of that.
If I could follow up on that, just because I think when we had our meetings with people in Australia, one of the things I think that came into focus for us was calling the platform itself Fembot, and then within that platform having Ada be the journal arm, right? Having Dirty Laundry be the feminist response to popular culture arm, and then leaving space for development as we move along. And it may be that we want to have a separate section that's just on pedagogy, where we could have conversations about innovations or things like that. But we were really thinking about Dirty Laundry in terms of a very general audience and a very general readership. But we felt like the journal is, in fact, going to be a journal that's going to help academics and have enough cultural capital to help our academic contributors. Because at the end of the day, that's our community.
So I had a question too, because I really like how Bryce framed things as the open sourcing of the language. Because several years ago, there were these big movements for open courseware, particularly out of a lot of the Ivy schools. And I thought they were great, and then I would go to look at them, and I was just bored out of my mind, which is part of it. But I think also the language and the terminology and the stuff that they used didn't work for the audience that they were trying to connect with that. And I think your approach using blogs and using other sources is really good. Have you seen any of those other movements move away to just kind of a more traditional academic model for open courseware, or are they still kind of producing that way?
They're still producing, are you talking about MIT's open courseware and that stuff?
Yeah.
They're still producing in that way. And I mean, one of the critiques of MIT's open courseware when I was at Brandeis, and we tried to use parts of it, was that not even our undergrads could get a hold of some of the language for some of the courses. And so, thinking about it in terms of there's barriers, and the first barrier is that, this is the academy. And the way you reinforce that barrier when you want to make it when it becomes more transparent is by putting, propping it up with language. And so it'd be nice to see those start to move. And I'm sure there's places where there's very low-key open courseware that's moving that way, but I just haven't seen it. And one of the places I would expect to see it is community colleges. But they're very protective of getting some kind of profit from people coming into their walls, which is understandable given the difference in funding models for universities versus community colleges. But I would think that would be the place for them to start.
Yeah, two things came to mind. MIT's been doing a lot with websites, and I don't know who is financing them. They have a lot of big conglomerates financing, for example, the Japanese Visual Database, which is this huge database with all these great sections, but it's already out of date. I mean, it has wonderful visual images, but it's still very linear. There's not that many hyperlinks. It's still on an older kind of model, but it's being funded by huge government sources. A second thing about languages, I know it's great to be cute and have lots of puns, but humor is one of the things that doesn't translate that well cross-culturally. So maybe that's something that we need to think about, or not, about what we call things or what our titles are of articles, or like Dirty Laundry is really cute. We get the joke and we get the gender reference, but what about women in other parts of developing countries that may look at Dirty Laundry differently? I'm not trying to say that we should do away with it, but maybe as we begin to title things, like even individual articles, we may want to keep in mind what
I think at this
translates.
point, from the beginning, all of the titles have been up for grabs, and that remains the case. So if people have other suggestions, we're doing the best that we can do as we go along. But if there are other suggestions and people have other ideas, that's what we're here for.
I do think, though, I take everybody's point. I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I also think from the point of view, I hate to say this, of marketing the project is great that, if you Google those terms, it's up in the top 8, but that's important too. And the reality is all of us are situated in these U.S., Canada, first marketed to our own communities here before it gets that global. And as it's getting global, this is the thing with open source or online is there's flexibility to add on, shift.
But not just reaching, for example, women in Japan, but reaching American citizens in the United States or Canada teaching Japanese studies.
That's it, yeah. That's what I'm trying to say. But they would know what the term dirty laundry might work.
But it wouldn't be the first thing that would come to mind. I'm just trying to
No,
to
we don't see anywhere
yeah.
find the site googling dirty laundry.
Right.
That's not the issue.
They might be
They're gonna
googling
find
the
the
other
site.
terms that are in that
That's how
and
good you
it's
get.
going to keep in mind.
Yeah. No, I just remember I went to this conference a bazillion years ago about renaming a journal and trying to give it an A name so it ranges to the top of the alphabet list. And we're like, no, Aardvark Times doesn't apply. But, so these things are, I guess.
Sure, no, it's very important, but I'm just thinking, I'm also trying to think, if we go completely that global before we're even local, and then these are things that can shift around. And as you know, I was also making those arguments about our diction and not addiction, diction, and how audiences and stuff, and actually sometimes even the word feminist would come under different kind of frameworks. But yeah, and I think that's something we could think about over the. But we do need to locate ourselves to start with, and we are located as a feminist project. If dirty laundry seems kind of hit, or within our feminist communities for some reason, and it at least circulates to 10 other places, that's more than we have now. And then we can shift it around to other things and then recode it. But I think I'm really happy with thinking so globally.
Well, it's funny because no more potlucks. If you say the name of the website to some people, they're like, what does that mean? I really like potlucks. I happen to not like potlucks. And so therefore when I first saw I was like, oh, I love the name of the website. And I think that we're going to wind up with some of that too, where you just have to do some of the explanatory work of the title and what it means and be prepared to do that if you're really committed to the title.
We have time for one more question. Gabriela has had one for a long time. What she has to say.
Oh, no, well, actually, similar to what Jess Radica said, and in response to what Alisa was saying, I think that, we have to be very realistic that this is going to be an English language journal, at least to start. Yeah. Obviously, we think globally, we should be thinking of 2 or 3 other major languages that are spoken in the world. And for that, we will be complicating our lives, searching for scholars who are feminists and who may be willing to publish or willing to also peer review things that we may want to put in our in this journal. So that, I think that right now we are at a stage where we cannot be thinking whether a search word is going to be, understood, I don't know, Timbuktu or Bolivia, or, But I think it's great that we should think to make it global, and because everybody around the world are searching, but we have to think also of language and what language is going to be the prevalent language. And the reality is that everybody here is speaking English and presenting in English.
Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we translate the journal into Japanese, even though if you'd like to do that, I'm all on board. But I guess I'm a little more sensitive to this because I am publishing about Japanese studies in the U.S., so I'm constantly having to go over context. Because here we can just write something about something like Sesame Street and everybody knows what it is. But if I'm writing about Okasan to Isho, like the Japanese Sesame Street, I have to back up and explain what it is, talk about for another context. So I guess my mind is always clicking, like what about, or the students that I have to explain an extra level, or maybe Lynn also faces this, that extra level of cultural context that if you teach American studies in the U.S., you can take for granted.
Sure.
So I'm just thinking, when we title things or when we do something, we might want to keep that in mind.
Sure, and that's a good point, but and part of what you're saying is we should probably have an ethic of trying to get our writers to think about that.
Exactly.
Kim and I were talking about that with Julia as well earlier. And that would kind of be in our structure of guidelines and stuff. Is we're thinking about a global audience.
Yeah,
and to model even for our students, I would like to invite you what it means to write for a global audience. And it actually goes very counter to the traditional journals we currently have, where, if we are writing, if I'm writing about something in India as well, it's, I was pointing to Kim just now, like, whether I'm writing about something in India or Second Life, they're equally exotic.
Exactly.
So for me to translate those, but that's where we go back to the issue of reviewing and holding the writers accountable in overall.
But not just that. I mean, asking people who are committed to maybe doing bilingual issues, right? We have a guest editor, or if Alisa wants to do an issue that's in Japanese, she wants to do all that work, she could do it. But I'm thinking, Gabrielle, if you wanted to, have some articles in Spanish and some articles in English in a special
because
issue.
the issue is that translating. Why do we have to translate to our comfort zone, which is English? Why don't we have another section that deals with similar topics or issues that are seen in a different way in a different part of the world, and that they can publish in their own language, right? I mean, because we are always translating and thinking of this global world as long as it's translated into the language we all speak.
Yes, but even if we didn't, we might do special issues with other languages. But going back to I think a point even Julia was making earlier, how do we make the English language global, which it claims to be, but it's right now colonially global. It's not global. How do we make it truly global by making our context here equally subject to as much rigor of explanation as the Japanese context or the Second Life context, right?
Right.
So that's a overall. We can continue to write in English, but how do we make English to be truly global? What does that mean? So
I'm sorry, I hate to be the person who ends discussion, but I'm going to be the person who ends discussion because we have to move on. Yeah, I have the vote. Panelists for the next round.